Okay, and so I would like to welcome you again to New Kitchen Culture with our speaker, Mary Rogers. Mary, do you want to share a little bit about yourself?
You bet. Thank you, Christina. So yeah, welcome everybody to why it is the new kitchen, as Christina said, but the subtitle is Why Are We So Bad at Feeding Ourselves? And I'm Mary Collette Rogers. I'm the founder of The New Kitchen. It's a nonprofit that's dedicated to sharing a new view of the kitchen as a place that's a vital, critical pathway to good health. And so I'm going to actually give you more about me a little bit later. For now, I just want to say, though, that I'm really glad to be here and have you all with me today, because I want to share and explore some ideas that have been gestating in me for years now, and I've never really felt like I was quite ready to talk about them. But I'm really grateful that Ed's given me a chance, and let's do it. And I look forward to maybe hearing some feedback from you, seeing how does this land with you. So with that, I have a couple of warm-up exercises, and these are just, we're just going to do them real quickly. They're just to sort of orient us in the right direction of where we're going today. Do any of these words come to mind when you think about the kitchen and cooking? And so, scan through there, see if there's any that you jump out at you. And if so, if you could put them in the chat, 2, 3, 4, whatever you feel like you have time to type out there. That would be wonderful. This is an exercise that we always did at the beginning of my cooking classes, kind of just to help people see where everybody's at with the kitchen and cooking. And then the other little warm-up exercises, this one is 4 ads from the 50s and 60s and 70s. And just take a look at them. And I'm not going to tell you much, but I just want to see, can you see what they're trying to tell us? I know there's a surface of image that you're going to see, but see if you see anything deeper there. And like I say, don't worry if it doesn't all make sense right now. We're going to come back to this later, but I just want to kind of plant some seeds in your brain for what's going to be coming down the road. Okay? So good. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop that share and go on to really start things. And to start with, I want to share a story about a woman named Marcy. And it turns out that this turned out to be a watershed moment, although I didn't know that at the time. And it happened after one of my first cooking class series. And one fact about me is that I've taught a lot of cooking classes, actually for 30 years now. And one of the classes that I was teaching was at Wild Oats Market, which was one of the first big health food chains, later got bought out by Whole Foods. And so they had a little kitchen in the store, and I'm teaching some classes. And this woman named Marcy came over. Turns out she was she worked for a company that imported Italian food. So she was in the store checking inventory and so forth. And she heard our class. And so she came over, and then she stayed after class to talk about her food situation. She was a single mom, had a daughter, and she really wanted to feed her daughter well. The problem, however, was that she had this job and she had to go around to eat all these different stores. And so she never got home until late. And by that time, you know what happens if we get home late, we haven't planned anything better. It's kind of catch as catch can for dinner. And so the problem was she really wanted to feed her daughter well and herself, but she kept running into this problem with time at the end of the day and not having anything planned that was better. So she asked me, well, Mary, do you have any ideas? And it's like, you asked me that question, I go right into problem solving mode, no problem there. And so I was like, well, what about batch cooking? You can do that on the weekend and have stuff all week. Oh, no, weekends are when I really want to do stuff with my daughter. Well, what about pre-cut veggies or frozen veggies? Because then at least you can have some vegetables in your dinners. And that vegetables are always good. Well, no, I just don't like to shop, and I'd have to shop then. Okay, well, what about planning your meals? Because if you plan your meals, it's easy to make a list. Then you can shop just once a week. You don't have to shop very much. Oh, yeah, I do so much planning for my job. I don't really want to do more planning. Okay, well, how about just really simple meals, triangle meals, a protein, a vegetable, and a starch. That's pretty easy to put together. You can even microwave half of it. Well, the problem with that is that that sounds really boring. and so we're kind of doing this back and forth for a few minutes and seemed to be going nowhere. And she seemed to give up and kind of wandered back to work. And it seemed like she was just confirming to herself, see, there really isn't a way for me to feed my daughter well. It just isn't possible. She seemed to be confirming that to herself. And she said, here, I proved it again. Well, meanwhile, I was kind of sorry and stumped. How could nothing help this woman? Everything I threw at her were time-tested strategies that I know they work. And so I left class that night kind of deflated, and usually I'm pretty invigorated after class because I love to teach. And so I thought a lot about why did I feel such a sense of disappointment? And I thought, well, maybe first it's like my strategies are all wrong. But then I just kept coming back to that word possible, because clearly Marcy did not believe that healthy meal making was possible in today's busy world. And that's when I realized that, it didn't matter what strategies I came up with. I could have come up with 100 strategies and they all would have failed, because her mind had already made itself up that healthy meal making isn't possible in today's world, just end of story. So where does that leave her? It kind of made me sad, which sounds a little bit corny, but because if it really wasn't possible for her to make good meals, where would that leave her? I mean, would she never get to experience the health benefits that come from eating well? And would she just kind of have to limp along on fast foods and frozen meals and deal with whatever consequences, the health consequences that those would bring? So this is the watershed moment, as I said. So all these questions that I was asking about Marcy led me down a path to where I am here at this talk, giving this particular theory that I have that's been gestating over a decade. And this is the question that I have now, is that when it comes to the challenges that we face around healthy eating, are they more cultural than individual? And if so, does this open new doors for aspiring healthy eaters? And so that's what we're going to explore a little more in this talk. But first, I want to backtrack just a little bit more, because I want to tell you just a little bit more about me and how I got into this whole healthy eating area. And I think I'm really typical of almost everybody that's in the healthy eating space. I've listened to all their stories, and we all follow the same outline. We were eating really bad, and then we got really sick. And then we learned that, wow, if we would just eat well, we could get better. And so we did that, and we experienced this miracle. Just by eating well, we experienced wonderful good health. And so for us, in our particular health crisis, is that I had a son who was just barely 6 months old. And Emery, I'm going to embarrass you here, because I'm going to show this wonderful picture that I just love. There's my son, barely 6 months old. He'd had one ear infection after another, even while he was on antibiotics. And the doctors were sure that pretty much the only thing that was left to put was to put ear tubes in. And there, my lovely daughter had croup infection after croup infection. And the doctors were ready to declare that she had asthma, and it was time for whatever, steroids, inhalers, that kind of thing. And me, I just had lots of airborne allergies and viruses, and we were just kind of a sick mess. And so I did something that was pretty unheard of at that time. Remember, this was 31 years ago. I went to see a naturopath. I didn't even know what a naturopath was. Don't know how I ever even thought of this or how I found one, but I did. And the treatment that he offered was just about as weird, things like body wraps and herbs and a gluten-free and dairy-free diet. And I didn't quite understand how that all worked, especially the diet. What relationship did that have to our health? But I did it all, and we experienced that small miracle. We overcame our sickness, and we actually got better than we were before. And so what that taught me is a couple of my epiphanies that came to me is that food matters, really. And I know to this audience at this point that this might sound kind of crazy, but at this time, we didn't understand the connection between food and health. We ate food. We liked food because it tasted good and it filled us up, but we had no idea that it was connected to health. If you had a sickness problem, you went to a doctor, you got pills. So it was really quite a revelation for me to see that food matters, really. And then the second epiphany I had was that the kitchen and cooking matter really too. Because what we found over the years that there's really only one pathway to good health, and that's eating real whole foods. And there I've got Dr. Bauman's health wheel, and then my simple prescription for good health. And they're all pretty much the same: eating real whole foods, wild diversity in moderation and balance. The problem, of course, is that these kinds of foods don't come in microwavable boxes. You can't find them in the health section at Target. You have to cook them. And that's where we have our problem. Because a lot of times we don't value the kitchen and cooking. And we're going to hear more about that in just a minute. But where I landed after my epiphanies and my introduction to good health was in the implementation area. And why that so attracted me was because of the struggle that I faced when I got this good eating prescription from my naturopath. Sure, put a gluten-free, dairy-free diet into place, but how am I supposed to do that, especially with 2 toddlers underfoot? And so, of course, he gave me a couple recipes. They all had cheese in them. So I was pretty much just on my own. But fortunately, I had a few cooking skills, and I put things together, and I did it, and I got us all healthy. But I just realized how difficult that path is to implement things. It's one thing to get a good eating prescription. It's another to put that into your daily life, day after day after day. And that part brings me to the second part of my focus through my New Kitchen Brought in Profit, which is the aspects of sustainability and continuity. Because it's pretty clear, and I think everybody in this audience knows that it doesn't do a whole lot of good to do a healthy diet for a week or two, or even a month or so. It's something we have to do for life. And I reached this really crucial point after a couple, 3 months of our healthy eating journey, is that I'd gotten us all better. But at that point, it was like, well, do I still want to keep doing that kind of effort and energy to keep our diet at that level? Or should I just go back to us eating pizzas and PB&Js and grilled cheese? And really, it wasn't a decision at all, because why would I want to go back to that ill health that we had experienced? But it was kind of a temptation. But it did make me realize how important it is to not only get a good eating prescription and to implement it, but to be able to do it for life, not just for a short amount of time. So bridging the implementation gap became my mission for the New Kitchen, focusing on not so much what we should be eating, lots of advice out there on that, but how we should be doing. And the big focus of my work was a lot of different tools, and you'll see some of them here, and I'll bring this up later at the end of the talk. But I've done meal management software program and cookbooks and this Take Control of Your Book and lots of online programs and articles and all of this kind of things. The big thing that I was trying to do, my whole kind of guiding approach at the time, was that I felt like if I could just give people the right time management strategies for the kitchen and the right cooking skills and explain the logic behind them, then we'd all be good to go and we'd all get healthy. The problem, of course, is when I had this conversation with Marcy, and that called that whole guiding theory into question, because my obvious, logical, sensible tools were not hitting the mark. Why was that? And it just, like I said before, I kept coming back to her thinking in that word possible. And it led me to wonder, is our thinking the problem? And you can see with Marcy, her impossibility thinking really was her root problem. There's a lot of talk these days about limiting beliefs and how we have to, get past those to be able to flower in our lives. And well, when you look at Marcy, I mean, her limiting belief around food I think qualifies as definitely a limiting belief. Couldn't even let her get out of the starting gate. So this then led me to wonder, well, maybe we suffer a lot of other brain barriers too, because over the years, I've run into a lot of different things that again and again and again as I worked with people over the years, I'd hear all these reasons about why I can't get healthy meals on the table. And this is only just a small selection there. Just take a minute to tick through that list. And have you ever heard yourself say any of those things, or maybe your friends or clients? So if you remember now, this circles back to that warm-up exercise that we did. Remember some of the words that you might have clicked with you when you think about the kitchen and cooking. Might any of those be any kind of brain barriers? And I know that, like here's a personal share for me. The couple of the brain barriers that I had to face was feminism, of all things. Another fact about me is that I practiced law for several years in the early 80s. I was one of the first big waves of female attorneys. And we were adamant that we were not going to end up chained in the kitchen like our mothers. And so look where life has led me. The big irony, right? And so for many years, it was a huge source of embarrassment for me and almost debilitating self-doubt. People would ask, "Oh, hey, Mary, how you doing? Hey, you still doing that cooking thing?" "Oh, how neat. That's so cute." So that really became a big brain barrier for me. Another was tedium. I was convinced that cooking was tiresome and no fun. And I don't want to spend any time doing that. And I probably got this from my mother, for whom it really was tedious and tiresome. And she mostly hated it. So that was something that I had to work through too, as I faced this mission of trying to feed my family well by cooking good meals with real whole foods. And it's important to understand this whole thing about brain barriers. And the reason for that is that these are real dead ends. And this is what we saw with Marcy. If you have a brain barrier like this, what's going to happen is it's going to dead end you. You won't have any room for discussion, for problem solving, for strategizing. It's just the end of the story. And I find that's especially true with that I don't have time to cook brain barrier. That was at the top of my list. And the reason is that probably every person I've ever talked to raises that objection. And after a while, I just got to where I stopped trying to strategize with people. I just said, "Yep, you're right. We just don't have time to cook." And so as I was outlining this talk, I was trying to think about, what's a good way of describing how I felt during this period? Because as I mentioned, I've done lots and lots of classes, lots of coaching. It seemed like everybody always had a lot of fun. Who doesn't have fun cooking and eating good food, And people always loved the classes and the coaching, and they would make good improvements. They'd be excited to move forward, but only to a point, because it seems like we always would run into this big, fat, invisible force field is what I'm calling it. Let's see if I can show it here. This is the best visual that I could find. We just keep slamming up against this force field and kind of getting thrown back, like, no further entry permitted. And I came to realize that, what I think that big force field is? It's our thinking. It's these invisible brain barriers that we've been talking about. And so, hidden deep down in our core, we don't really believe that healthy meals are possible in today's hectic world for lots of different reasons. And so our efforts and our excitement, they get repelled, and we're kind of put back in our place, wishing and dreaming for something better, but not capable of actually making that happen. Did you notice any brain barriers that you might be facing? And do you ever feel a sense of this big force field that's kind of holding you back from achieving your healthy eating dreams?
Yeah, I would say one brain barrier is potentially just feeling like I'm not very creative, and everyday meals, I just don't have the bandwidth to make them creative. So it often ends up being just what's a starch and what's a protein and what's a veggie that I can just quickly grab. And so that kind of gets somewhat probably like makes meal making feel a bit more tedious sometimes, because I don't just even allow myself to think that I could get like slightly creative, because I just don't feel like I have time.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. And to tell you the truth, that's probably the first time I've heard something like that. I mean, probably I'm sure I've heard it from you before, but you're one of the few people. Well, thank you for sharing that. I wonder if anybody else has anything that's coming up for them now. Christine?
I actually tried a meal plan. Oh, sorry. I actually tried a meal plan and nobody wants to eat what is on the day that I meal plan. So I just say, well, here's a list of things you can eat by yourself. I'm not making another meal.
Good for
I just try to
you.
I do instant pot cooking. So I like make chicken for the week. I do pulled chicken and it's in the fridge. And I said, go get some veggies and throw it in some broth, because there's food in there.
Oh, good. And does that mean that, Melanie, then do you cook a dinner, and if they don't want it, then go get the chicken and get a vegetable? You're on your own?
Or they'll just do protein shakes, because I'm not. But it's very overwhelming when you try to meal plan and they don't want to eat what's on that day. And so then I start getting discouraged, and I don't meal planning.
Very good. Yeah, no, those are exactly things that happen to people. And I've heard those before. Very good. But congratulations. Go ahead.
Yeah. It's bad connection.
What's that, Melanie? Say it again.
Oh, it's a bad connection. But yeah, back to your batch cooking. I try to do that instead, because then there's always something.
Yeah. Well, and kudos to both of you that you don't succumb and become a short order cook. That's where a lot of people end up doing, and you run yourself ragged, and then doesn't do anything for your health. Well, let's keep those brain barriers in mind there, because we're going to go on. I'm going to continue on, but there'll be a chance to revisit them in a minute. But thank you all for sharing those. I love that. I'm going to try to remember what they are and write them down. So, and one of the big problems with this force field that we run into in these brain barriers is it almost pushes us into the welcoming arms of the convenience food industry. Because for those people who don't cook, what do you do for meals? Well, the convenience food industry is there with welcoming arms. Then they will take care of you. But the problem, of course, is we know that convenience foods are killing us. It's a slow and disease death, but they're definitely killing us. And, kudos to you all that you don't let yourself go that route. You at least put together some real whole foods. Maybe it's not as creative. Maybe it's not on the meal plan, or maybe people won't eat the meal plan, but at least you're not resorting to that last ditch effort of just going toward the frozen meals or the Hot Pockets or whatever it is, dialing for pizza. But as I look at the vast majority of Americans, it's kind of sad. What I felt after Marcy is that my tools and my strategies weren't hitting the mark. And so I wondered, well, what should I be doing? How should I be directing my efforts in this field? And fortunately, I made this watershed discovery, and that kind of matched my watershed moment. And that was finding the book that was called Something from the Oven. There we go. It's over there on the right-hand side. And the way I found this book was kind of interesting. I do cooking get-togethers in people's houses, and one book group was actually reading Perfection Salad, the book on the other side of that page. And in that book, the author, Laura Shapiro, mentioned her other book called Something from the Oven and hinted that it might have some answers for me, because it was talked about food history in the post-World War II period. And so I ran out, got that book, and I ended up just devouring it. And I found out I had so many aha revelations as I read it. It definitely confirmed that we were facing a lot of thinking barriers and where they came from. And it confirmed that there really was this kind of big invisible force field out there that was blocking our way to healthy meal making and eating. And the source of those barriers, which was kind of surprising, was convenience food marketing beginning in the 50s and continuing until today. So let me just share some of her findings, because it's so critical to understand this, to understand where we are in our food world today. The premise of her book is that there was a sea change in our food world after World War II. We started on a trajectory that was quite different from all the centuries before. And it was sparked by the aftermath of World War II, because as we know, World War II is this huge war with huge mobilization of soldiers, code breakers, guns, ships, planes, bombs, the whole thing. But the other thing that it was really mobilized in a huge way was food, because we had to feed all those soldiers. And so what we saw was the development of the famous K rations. And those were like your first convenience prepackaged meals, right? But it kept the soldiers alive on the front lines. Now, so World War II finally ends, thank goodness. But then we have another problem, is we have all this industrial capacity that we mobilized to win the war. But then what do we do with it once the war is over? It's a lot of capital investment, and people don't want to just waste it. So the manufacturers of things like K rations got a great idea. Let's sell these to consumers. I mean, who wouldn't want some ready-made packaged meals? How easy and convenient. Well, it turns out that not many people really did want those packaged K rations. And so they reformulated them, and they strategized, and they made some taste improvements, but still homemakers didn't want anything to do with this. They were really just fine with their own meals. And so the manufacturers changed their tack, and they employed this new science of consumer marketing to convince women to buy their convenience foods, even if they didn't want to. And they would do this by advertising to women how they needed these foods because cooking is tedious and awful and time consuming. And so let me just share a couple passages from the book because they're so enlightening. Let's see if I can, let me see if I can get this thing to kind of not take up so much of the screen. So this is right from the book, or slightly paraphrased. So, to the chagrin of food marketers back in the 50s, no independent research backed up the vision of the homemaker who loathed making dinner. In fact, the overwhelming consensus of scholars was that women liked cooking better than any other household task. In fact, in one study, 95% expressed positive feelings about cooking. What's more, most women had no trouble finding enough time to produce a typically unadorned American meal for their families, and they rarely complained that cooking took too much time. Well, so in response to these findings, marketers using this new science of consumer psychology waged a full-force campaign to dismantle women's stubborn and insensible affinity for cooking. I just love that. We were so stubborn and insensible, right? So step one of that process was to dismiss as outmoded any chore more laborious than applying a finishing touch to prepared food. Women were bombarded with marketing messages and articles that contrasted the food industry's modern version of cooking, and they contrasted that with its old-fashioned counterpart, which was always depicted as a task of staggering dimensions. And then step two was a relentless effort to convince women that they actually did not have time to cook, even if they thought otherwise. Advertisements and stories plowed across the media, reminding readers again and again how busy they were, how frantic their days, how desperately they needed products for quick meals. So it took a while, but in the end, the convenience food marketers won the war, and they won women over to accept their convenience food products. And so I wanted to take a time, I showed you a couple ads right at the beginning, but I want to take a minute to show you some of the ads and see. Remember, I asked you, what do you think they're telling us by these ads? So let's take a look a little deeper, because at first, you kind of look at these, you go, oh, they're so cute and they're kind of quaint, they're nostalgic. But there's a deeper message in all of these, and I wonder if you can see it. Here we are in the 1950s. And what's interesting is that some of the first focus group research was done on women in this period. And they found out that women didn't want to use all convenience foods because they felt like that was shirking their duty to their family to cook wholesome and nutritious meals. And so what the industry did instead was to show how you could use different convenience foods and piece them together to make a meal so that women would still feel like they were so-called cooking. And so there we have our Vienna sausages and our canned corned beef hash and cheese whiz that we can just put meals together real quick with. And then here we go on a little later I'm still in the 50s, maybe into the 60s. And we have Kraft macaroni cheese. And note how at the bottom they are emphasizing that this is home cooked dinners. In the middle, we see how you can use whip and chill to make 498 different desserts in less than 12 minutes. Not all 498, but each one less than 12 minutes. But this is that idea of mixing and matching different convenience foods. And then, of course, there's the Campbell's cream of chicken and cream of mushroom soup that in those days went in just about everything. And but then as the decade ended, we kind of got into the 70s and definitely into the 80s. You can see over there on the right-hand side is that we have Swanson's TV dinner. So we're starting to see that it is actually okay and acceptable to start advertising that you can have your whole meal made with convenience foods. You don't even have to assemble. And so a question for you is, do you see what's happening here? Do you see what's happening in terms of where is traditional cooking in all of these ads? Where is it? It's kind of disappearing. We're seeing it less and less in these ads. Now let's go on to the 70s and the 80s. Oh, this is a great one. We see here's the Colonel telling us that the circled part down there is that his bucket of fried chicken is North America's hospitality dish. So now you can see we're getting completely away from cooking our own meals. And in that, let's see, I think this was in the 80s or late 70s, 80s, we're pretty much disappearing cooking all the way. Here on the far left, we see Mary's Kitchen's corned beef hash, where you just make just that. You don't have to bother trying to fix it up with anything else. And it comes as close to mom's as we can make it. Trying to convince us that this is the equivalent of home cooking. Chili there on the right, and then lots of Betty Crocker side dishes that you just have to pop from the box and add water there in the middle. So when we get into this stage, what you're finding is that food makers are no longer talking to women about how assembling convenience foods, because we've already dispensed with the notion that cooking is necessary, that you need to do cooking because that's what, is part of your role as a good homemaker. That's been dispensed with. Now we're going on to just popping things in the microwave, because as we got into the 80s, there were microwaves, so we can just zap and serve some little sausages over here. And continuing to emphasize, though, the importance of time, because here over on the side, we've got Dinty Moore, how their beef stew is quicker to fix than a can of soup. And, how hard is a can of soup to fix to begin with? But the microwave and Dinty Moore makes it even faster. And there's that emphasis again on you need these foods because you're so busy. You need stuff that's really fast. And then as we close in and come close to the 90s, we're starting to see how they're starting to dumb down. The ads are beginning to dumb down the food range for kids. There's that's what we should be feeding kids over there on the left, which is macaroni and cheese and a hot dog and a couple pickles. I guess that's your vegetables there. Also interesting to look down in the middle there is Weight Watchers, because I think this is about the time we're starting to see that, wow, we're starting to gain weight from all these convenience foods. So now Weight Watchers has got to come on the scene and try to come up with convenience meals that will be friendlier to our weight. And of course, our tastes are becoming more international, and Susie Wan has us covered there. Thank goodness. So then as the 90s come on, then the interesting that happens is that we stopped. There's still plenty of ads for convenience food, but even more, what came more and more visible were ads for just fast food restaurants and eating out at like fast casual restaurants, like skip the kitchen altogether. In fact, and then by the 2015, we were actually spending more at restaurants than we were food that we made at home. Now, the pandemic has kind of switched that, and it's going to be interesting to see where that goes. But that was where the 90s started. And then the second thing that started in the 90s was what I call health benefit marketing. And what I mean by that is that, as the 90s came on, and we really did start noticing that these convenience foods were being a health problem. And the particular issue that was the issue of the day was fat. We were all trying to reduce the fat. And so marketers and convenience food manufacturers were trying to reformulate their products to eliminate the fats. And then they would advertise those. And so that became a big part of their marketing, was their low fat. Their low fat claims. And then since that time, when the low fat era ended, we went on to low carb. Well, they started making products and advertising those. And since then, we've seen things for low sugar and, things that are keto friendly and probiotic. And the latest is immune boosting foods, which led to this article in the Wall Street just a couple of months ago. They're just noticing that, wow, have you noticed why there are so many food ads that are touting food products that are good for your immune system? And of course, it has to do with the pandemic. But they're saying over there on the right, you can see that even cans of cheese ball now are touting immune system benefits. And just in the first half of this year, 383 food and beverage products with immune health claims. And so this is sort of where the marketing is going now. And you can see we're long past the days when they're trying to minimize cooking, because that's already been mission accomplished. And just one last one. I love this one where, here are the three worst enemies of consumer health and biggest purveyors of sugar. And yet here they are working together to reduce sugar. So all of this is going on, and I'm looking at these ads and reading something from the oven and thinking back to my past, clear back to my days on the farm. And it's really opening my eyes, and I'm going, like having a lot of aha moments. And the first of those was just how clueless I was, because I lived through that whole period, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and the whole thing. I didn't know this was going on. I like to think of myself as a fairly bright person. I didn't know this marketing was happening to me. And yeah, when I went into my grab and go lifestyle as an attorney, I could see that absolutely I had drunk the Kool-Aid, as they say today. And then secondly, it was just amazing to me how quickly centuries of tradition disappeared. For centuries, we have always honored and respected food in our lives. And yet all of a sudden, and like for when I was raised as a kid, dinner time was sacred. Nobody ever missed dinner time. We revered it, even though we didn't acknowledge it. But over the course of like 20 or 30 years, all of a sudden that disappeared. And then it was, like I said earlier, it was confirmation of my suspicion that we had a thinking problem here. And that what Marcy was facing in so many of us was brain barriers that had been planted there by the convenience food industry. And that led me to the most problematic of all my ahas, and that was that the backdoor exit had also been blocked. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let me start with the front door. For the longest time, healthy eating advocates have known that convenience foods are killing us. And that's been at least since the 90s. So that's been quite a number of years. And they've been sounding the alarm. It's like the house is on fire. Get out. And the most obvious solution would be to run out the front door. Just stop eating all the processed foods that are causing us problems. But these foods are like so good, and they're cheap, and they're everywhere. They're so convenient. And so it's really hard for us to just stop eating them. Well, so this takes us to the back door, because along comes people like me and Dr. Bauman and all these different health practitioners who are probably with us today. And we're whispering in your ears, that there's a secret back door that you can get out. Well, all you have to do is you sneak out. You go to the grocery store, you buy food, real food, and you cook it. And then all of a sudden, you have these great meals and you don't need convenience foods anymore. But the problem, of course, is that, and I didn't realize this for the longest time until I got to this point, is that the convenience food industry had blocked that back door as well as the front. And they did this because of years of devaluing cooking. That caused us to lose the motivation, the meaning, the desire, the inspiration to head to the kitchen and cook our own meals. We believed exactly what they said, that it's too time-consuming, too tedious, and even dorky and old-fashioned. So eventually, after years of staying away from the kitchen, we also lost the skills, the cooking skills and the kitchen know-how that would allow us to escape out that back door and cook our own meals. You know, we're now on to a third generation of people who don't know how to, these vital life skills of how to make your own health-giving meals. And while we indeed could learn these skills, at this point, we're so far removed that it's almost too overwhelming to even think about trying. So we end up feeling really trapped. Both the front and the back doors are locked and barricaded. And now I understand why people like Marcy feel so hopeless around healthy eating. They just feel trapped. And the thing is that this has been going on for so long now. It's 70 years now since the 50s. So it seems to have just become part of our cultural DNA. So my question is whether we need to also be working at the level of our cultural DNA if we are to see significant improvements in our healthy eating habits. And that circles us back to the question where we started. When it comes to the challenges we face around healthy eating, are they more cultural than individual? And if so, does this open new doors for aspiring healthy eaters? And that then takes us on back to the main focus of this talk, which is a new kitchen culture. And it brings us back to where I started with, I'm founder of The New Kitchen, this nonprofit that wants to introduce a new view of the kitchen and cooking, and love to introduce as well. My more current focus is introducing a new cultural DNA, one that supports the kitchen and cooking. And there are 3 steps in this adventure that I'm proposing. The first of those is gaining awareness of the brain barriers that we face, exploring the truth of those barriers, and then understanding the power that we hold to create a new culture. So let me share a little bit about each one of those steps. And then I'm going to open it back up because I want to see what additional thoughts you've had. We talked a little bit about brain barriers, and I saw a couple more chats on that. But then I'm going to talk to you about what do you think this new culture might look like? But first, let's go back to step 1, gaining awareness of brain barriers. And I hope, actually, I think that's what we've done today. And I hope that you've gotten aware of that. You know, how clever marketing has created a lot of these brain barriers that had divorced us from the kitchen. You know, things like cooking is too tedious, cooking is silly and old-fashioned and dorky. And I have to say that I'm very happy to say that we have a really wonderful corroborator with our efforts in this direction, none other than Michael Pollan, and you probably all know of him. But he, a couple of years ago, did a video around Thanksgiving, and he was bemoaning the death of cooking and noticing how, as cooking went down, our health problems were going up. He saw a real direct correlation. And so this is what he said. But we have been almost brainwashed to think of cooking as drudgery, something we don't have time for or something we don't have the skills for. We're being daunted about cooking. And then you have the industry with marketing messages that are flattering our sense of busyness, implicitly telling us we don't have time to cook. You're too important. And what's more, you're a loser if you have time to cook. And so thank you, Michael Pollan, for that nice message there. So now we'll go back to step 2, which is, okay, let's explore the truth of the mind barriers that we face. And this will be interesting. Maybe I hope we'll have time to explore the ones that were brought up and see what might be going on there. But I know that the one thing I found in exploring my brain barriers is that they do not reflect absolute objective truth. What they reflect is what the convenience food industry wants us to think about the kitchen and food. And so, the crazy thing is we all heard the messages, we followed them, we reinforced them with each other, and now they've become just pretty much common assumptions, but that doesn't make them true. And so that's why it's so important for us to explore them, because you know what? We're not trapped. We're not really. There's nobody holding a gun to our heads. We can re-examine these things and think differently. And so that gets us into understanding the power that we hold to create a new kitchen culture. It's important to understand and remember that a culture is supposed to be the reflection of the people who live in that culture. Just unfortunately, we allowed ours to get hijacked for commercial purposes. So ours reflects the values of the convenience food industry. In other words, their value is to make a lot of money selling convenience foods, right? That's their job. But since the culture is actually ours and making money on convenience food is not our value, it's within our power to recreate that culture so it's more supportive in what we need for our needs. So the question is, how do we create a new kitchen culture, one that values and promotes health and well-being and good energy and strong mental capacity and all those wonderful things? And create is a word that I use really intentional here because this really is a creative endeavor. We need to dig down into our hearts and our imagination and think about what do we really yearn for around food and meals and the kitchen and meal making and even food production. And so this is where I want to return to you all and ask, would you be willing to help envision what values we would like to see reflected in a new, more supportive kitchen culture? What would you like to see that would help support the good health that we all seek? And if anybody's got any ideas right now, that would be great. If not, I also thought it might be helpful to go through step by step, this awareness of our brain barrier. We started with that. But first, let me see, did anybody just have any questions or have any immediate ideas about what could a new kitchen culture look like?
One thing that I shared in the chat, because you had mentioned about what is needed that is not there. And I think one thing that is really not there right now is equity when it comes to food distribution. There is not accessibility of healthy foods in all communities, and there is not affordability of healthy foods in all communities. And until we can make healthy foods affordable for all and accessible to all, then there are populations that are going to continue to gravitate towards the processed foods, not because it's foods that are more convenient or that they prefer, but because it's all they can afford. And I think that's definitely part of this whole conversation. Like I totally agree with all of the things that were said about this culture around de-emphasizing the importance of cooking. And definitely there should be that emphasis on the importance of cooking. And then just along with that, as far as what we cook, there's a lot of emphasis on the need to have healthy food. And in order to cook healthy food, there has to be that financial ability to afford to shop at places that provide organic or healthier options than what a lot of grocery stores provide. So just wanted to throw that into the mix.
Yeah, no, Christine, I totally agree with you. And that needs to be like a whole plank. I mean, that is such a big part. That's so huge, but it's absolutely necessary. And I've worked in that space some. And so I'm aware, and I totally agree with you that that's a critical piece of this. Yeah. So let's go back. And I don't know that I have immediate answers for some of the brain barriers that were raised, but definitely sounded like one of them was a brain barrier about what kids do and don't eat. I don't know if that includes spouses or not, but maybe it does. Sometimes they can just be about as bad as the kids. But that's a definite brain barrier. You could see that's why I love that one ad about how over the years we have been indoctrinated to believe that kids are only capable of eating about 5 different things. And if you go into a restaurant, you'll see the kids menu is always what quesadilla is, mac and cheese, a grilled cheese. And so if we're aware of that brain barrier, well, then we go on to step 2, which is it really true? And so think about that for a minute. And Emery, I like your one around creativity. Just think about that for a minute. I wanted to share with you, go back to my 2 examples, so you could see how what kind of thinking I went through when I questioned them. Because remember, my first barrier was around feeling embarrassed because I was not being a very good feminist by returning to the kitchen and teaching people to cook. And all my explorations over the years finally led me to realize, like, wait a minute, who said that the kitchen and cooking are inherently and objectively embarrassing? What's the logic there? Why should I feel such debilitating self-doubt when I am contributing to the world by helping to prevent chronic illness? And when I thought about it, what's really true is that cooking is just something you do. Oh, okay. Cooking is just something that you do to stay alive, for goodness sakes. It's absolutely necessary, and it's just a neutral activity and just a part of life, unless you've been convinced to believe that it's trite and unimportant because someone wants to sell you frozen fish sticks. And then on the tedious part, I started going, well, number one, I actually found that cooking could be kind of fun and creative. And like, Emery was mentioning, having that feeling of not feeling very much creative. But when you do, you go, oh, this is kind of fun. This can be rewarding. And then I thought about all the other household chores that we have to do, like cleaning the bathroom. Well, just because we don't like to clean the bathroom, nobody says don't do it. They'll sell you 15 different products to do it, but they don't say don't do it. I mean, even going out to going on vacation can be stressful if you get caught in traffic and you have to wait in long lines, but nobody says don't do them. You just learn to work around the stressful and challenging parts. And so that's how I came to resolve the 2 issues that I face and got to the point where, like, I can share today, because I realized that cooking is a wonderful, vital, critical part of our lives. And that's why I can share about the kitchen and cooking in a talk like today. But let me go back. Yeah, I'm sorry. Did somebody want to raise their hand or talk?
It looks like we do have a hand raised.
Okay, somebody on an iPhone.
It's from, did you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Or just some feedback?
It looks like I don't have a name. I just says iPhone and the hand is raised.
Oh, hey, it's Danusha Lucia.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I wanted to speak to a couple of the points because I just love what you're both bringing up. They're valid topics and important for us to continue to scavenge for the answers to these big issues. I find it interesting that the movement that you're talking about, because you're speaking from a perspective that that is like building on to what I've learned already, and what an important documentary that came out earlier this year, Kiss the Ground, about regenerative agriculture and how they cite how the agricultural infrastructure is an extension of the war machine, basically. And the conversations they're just like they're building, I feel like, one after another, like speaking to layers of truth. Yes. And so good point. So it's like this, you can talk about it like in a way of like disenfranchisement of like women's role in like their power position in the kitchen. Like the kitchen, I feel like in a more primal sense, it's where the fire of the building is, the heart of the home and the heart of the family. And the mother oversees the fire, and she tends to the kitchen, and she enjoys the processes. And I've spent years in the culinary industry since I was 15 years old. I'm about to be 30 now, and I've found so many of the like militaristic aspects like seeping into the culture in culinary, and it's like it's very patriarchal, and it feels like difficult to be in there when you're a woman. And that for me, then I took on more like masculine qualities just being in like my chef's coat and just the whole uniform. I like basically undress myself as a woman and like put on the uniform as like a soldier man or something, and I don't do that often anymore. I'm a solo mother, but I like cook. I try to cook nutritious meals throughout the day. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the facilitator, but yeah, the affordability is a big issue. But it's like, I feel like sometimes our limiting beliefs are used against us too. And it's like, yes, there's some truth to it, but it's like also, maybe somebody doesn't want you to know like how you can access these resources that are actually available to you, like maybe they want you to be like disconnected from the earth and, know how abundant the earth mother really is when it comes to nourishing and feeding us when we have our hands to the ground. So that's just what I would say. Sorry,
wow. Was your name Denisha?
Danusha Lucia?
Okay. Powerful words. What a wonderful addition to the talk. Thank you so much. Because, what you've emphasized, I wish I'm going to have to listen to what you said again, because there was so much in there. But a couple of things that come to mind is that what you're seeing, and this is exactly what I'm finding too, is that food is an epicenter of life. Duh. And so the way we raise food, prepare food, eat food, grow food, it's all part of this same wheel, and it's all been denigrated. And so this new kitchen culture, and I think this is where I want to wrap back where we were, is that what you've mentioned are some powerful elements to add to the new kitchen culture. And there's that little one. I love it.
Yeah.
But yes, honoring. Well, Denisha, I want you to hang on to your thoughts there, because I want to share one more thing here about, because where we are now is I want to talk about where does everybody think about the new kitchen culture? And you've already mentioned several things that are just like really amazing additions. And let me show you where I start with this. When I first started thinking about this, the three big things I wanted our kitchen culture to incorporate was that, number one, food holds an honored and respected place in our lives. It is the key to wellness. And here's those who grow and prepare food are critical contributors to the community's well-being. And that cooking is an invaluable and vital life skill. And that's, I wanted to bring this up because I feel like that's what you're touching on there, is how those who grow and prepare food, all aspects from the seed to the finished plated dish, are valuable and critical to our lives. And I like also your reference to the role of women as tenders as people who are tending the hearth, being the focal point of families, community, earth. And what role do we have to return this out of the battleground and into a nurturing relationship that we would have with food in the kitchen and cooking and meal making and growing? So I think this was really valuable contributions, very insightful. And thank you. Does that make sense too? I mean, I think you really are hitting the nail on the head in terms of what a new kitchen culture needs to look like. Does that make sense, Denisha?
I think you're speaking to a lot of what I personally experienced, and so I'm finding resonance with what you're saying for sure. Like the whole cooking as a vital life skill. it's so true. And it's an incremental skill that builds up throughout our childhood. And so if we're, we can be at a disadvantage if we grew up around that culture where every meal was a fast meal and it takes years to untangle that. So, I was fortunate to have some years with my mother where she cooked things from scratch before she had to go to work, in most of my childhood. So I was exposed to both, and I've been dedicated to the kitchen, like learning how to make things from scratch since I was a kid, and I feel like I've struggled with it. So, that I have a lot of compassion for people who do, but it's also, like you said, working with your limited beliefs and really detangling that web of illusion.
Yes. Oh, amen. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing. And while I'm here, I wanted to share along these lines, that Tanisha's added her thinking on this, but I wanted to share also, I did a workshop up in Oregon a couple years ago, and it was about the new kitchen culture as well. And these are some of the things that group came up with. And I'm going to add Tanisha's thing and anything else that anybody wants to add. I'm going to add it to this list. And I do have a book coming out at some point. I'm in the process of writing it. And all of this is going to go into the book to show people we can recreate this. And it's amazing when I start seeing the neat things that people come up with. Is what do they want with their new kitchen culture? Like we don't have time to go through all of these, but a kitchen space that's welcoming and colorful, a place where you want to be, that we take the time to create that space, or we consciously shift our view of cooking from stressful and tedious to decompressing and meditative. Or like number 7, in line with Qigong, we recognize that meals and meal making have energy elements, and we work to tap into and bring good energy into them. Does that not just excite you? I get little chills as I'm reading those. I just love it. So let me, I've got one more step I want to talk about, but first, I think, Christina, do we have a couple more minutes that we can open it up for, if anybody else has some more, just anything on brain barriers, exploring the truth, or new kitchen culture, or any other questions?
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to thank Tanisha as well for her comments, and just also something that you said that really resonated with me was when you talked about how some of these limiting beliefs are also kind of thrust upon us by other forces that are at play. And I think that you're absolutely right. I mean, again, when I think about the community that I live in, I live in a very low income area where not everybody has a car. Again, people are barely making the money to pay their rent. And this idea of, I can go shop at Whole Foods, which is 30 minutes away, and I have to figure out how I'm going to get there, versus, I can walk to Foods Co. and I can get food for half the price. Obviously, there's like a system at play. It's like, it's a transportation issue. It's an inequality issue. It's a, lack of equity in pay and what people make issue. It's a systemic issue, and it's not just one thing. It's all these different things that are connected. And so I really love that you pointed that out, that it's like, it's not even necessarily like the individual that's cognizantly choosing or not choosing these things, but sort of a system that's at play that ends up creating this culture of what I think I can do and what I think I can't do based on the resources that are available to me because of this society that I'm living in that's created all of that.
It's a little bit of a crazy circle.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you to let my hair down a little bit, when I was in my early 20s, I was in such a bad financial position that I was buying ramen noodles because they're 25 cents. And I could have a whole meal for 25 cents.
That's right.
And I knew that the food was bad and I didn't want to be eating it. And when I tell you that it was all I could afford, I can't begin to tell you how much I am not over exaggerating that at that point in my life, I was barely making enough money to pay my rent. And the idea of a meal for 25 cents was, how could I turn that down? And obviously, like 15, 20 years later, I'm in a very different place in my life, different place financially, and my health is a lot better because I can afford to buy healthy foods. But I also recognize that I'm in a privileged position now that I wasn't in before, that I'm able to afford the things that I wasn't able to afford before. And there's just many families in my area in particular that just don't have that luxury. And so And what's interesting is that the area that I live in is actually cooking is very much part of the culture, but it's again, it's not about the lack of desire to cook. It's the what it is that is actually being cooked.
Available to cook.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, Christina, just a thought that just came to me though too was how interesting. I mean, this is not to denigrate what you're saying, but an interesting fact is that one of the times that I ate the worst was when I was practicing an attorney, had plenty of money, and then you don't have time. And through going through law school, when, you know, I was like you, barely paying the rent, but, you know, we ate a lot of turkey because it was really cheap. But isn't that interesting? I never thought about that until just now, is that, and a lot of the people who don't eat well, you know, that really rely on convenience foods, are people who, it's not a matter of lack of money, it's a lack of time. So kind of interesting, huh? Interesting. iPhone, Denisha, I think you have your hand raised again. See, I can ask you to unmute.
Yes, yeah, I'm listening to what you both are saying, and I just want to piggyback further.
Go right ahead. That's what we're doing here.
Yeah, I definitely think that cooking isn't the entirety of the equation, but it is an important aspect of it, as you both seem to be saying. And but a huge part of it, which is what I'm struggling with as like a chef and a mother, is ownership of the food, and that's being tied to our land, where we are. You know, if we're not connecting like our gardens with our kitchens, I feel like there's a lack of joy and a lack of connection with the sun and the source, and that literally can manifest as like huge vitamin D deficiencies, which it did for me when I was like in a kitchen full time, where it had no windows, which most kitchens don't. And so it wasn't really until like I cooked for a farm, especially in Hawaii a few years ago, and it was like really farm to table, and making a meal that is just connecting the experience of community and of just connection with place, and just everything, internalizing nature. And there's a really good documentary called Gather that came out recently that speaks to this connection for Native Americans, and how that sovereignty, the land sovereignty and the seed sovereignty, is really connected with their healing, their diets, and their bodies.
It almost sounds to me, Denisha, like you're talking about like, we have to reconnect this circle, like, you know, the whole circle of life thing. We've broken it up into little bits, and put the cooking over, you know, the cooking is our culture's cooking is done over in windowless kitchens, you know, commercial kitchens. And then our food is raised in farms way off, and the product is shipped here, and it's full of pesticides. And then, you know, we don't know the farmers. We don't have a connection with, a lot of us don't even handle fruits and vegetables so that we have a connection to the earth with that. So that's kind of an interesting observation that you're making. It's really got to be a big circle to bring it all back together.
If food isn't cooked from scratch in our kitchens, it's most likely going to be cooked in a building that doesn't have windows, whether that be in a restaurant or like a really nice processing facility.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, thank you so much. If there's anybody else that wants to share on that, and I don't want to cut us off, but I just am trying to be mindful of our time here, our time limit, because I wanted to end by, and if anybody wants to stay after, I'm happy to. So, you know, if you have any other questions or anything. But I wanted to end with one more step. We've gone through the three main steps, but the fourth step, I think, is that implementation, because remember, that's what I'm all about. And the implementation step for the new kitchen culture is, are we ready and willing to both create it, but also live it as exemplars? And I think a key here is courage, because everything that we're talking about, we've all talked about how we're advocating and suggesting something that's against the way that our food world has ended up here at the beginning of the 21st century. And so it's going to take some courage to speak up. I don't think we have to do it in an antagonistic way, but a gentle way. And like, I know that people are always talking to me, say about, oh, I only cook for myself, so I don't really want to cook, because it doesn't make sense, right? And for the longest time, I always said, oh, yeah, I guess you're right. But then I gave that some thought and I said, what do you mean? I've been cooking for myself for years and years, and I don't deprive myself of good meals and go for frozen fish sticks just because I cook for myself. So I was forced to really examine the logic of it, found no logic, but I did find some great marketing that advocated that idea that started about the time that the single population in our country started spiking. And so now when people say, oh, I only cook for myself, I say, oh, that's no problem at all. You can cook for yourself, you betcha, and you deserve it too. And so I wonder if we can think about, times when we're in conversations with friends or families or clients and they want to talk about brain barriers to cooking, can we begin turning those conversations around, like, asking them to explore the truth of that, talking to them about, maybe would you really yearn for something just a little bit better than having to resort to convenience foods? And I put this 5 agreements card up there because I think a lot of you have probably heard the book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And he has these 4 agreements. And I've got my wallet here, and I still have these little 4 agreements in my wallet. And I see them every now and then. So I did something similar with a new kitchen culture. So this is in your handout. So we don't have time to go over it now. But think about what might be your commitment. What are your agreements for a new kitchen culture? You can add your own. You can use some of mine. Talk about it with friends. That would be all wonderful. And so last little slide I want to just share is just, you've seen this before, but these are some of the resources that I offer. The thing is, I really believe that the first step we all have to make, and with those who practice with clients, we all have to get to the point where we're at peace and okay with cooking and meal making, because all of this is really kind of pointless until we are ready to take action and you're comfortable with it. But if you get some clients or yourself at that point, know that I have lots of online programs, books, I do cooking programs, I do coaching. All those are available to help you implement and save time and be really efficient when you do it. And of course, Bauman has a lot of those kinds of things as well. So to conclude, I just want to say that maybe some of you are feeling like this could really be kind of hard to believe, like, really? We could make really good meals for ourselves despite our hectic lives. But I'm going to only ask that you just open your mind and open your brain and let those ideas seep in and simmer for a while. Just allow yourself to ask some questions around food and meals and meal making and the kitchen. And then allow yourself to start considering about whether there are some deep parts of you that would like to return to the nurture of the kitchen, even if every fiber of your convenience culture DNA is shouting about what a silly waste of time that it is. And see if over time you get to a point of being at peace and okay with cooking in the kitchen. And maybe you'll just be surprised by what a nourishing refuge it can be. And that's certainly how it has played out in my life. So I want to say thank you to everybody. I loved your comments and your input, your feedback. I hope you'll stay in touch with me and share more. Like I said, I'm going to stay after if anybody wants to. And then, Christine, could you just explain, though, you said that if you like this workshop and want to continue the conversation online, please join baumanwellness.co. What is that about?
Sure. So Bauman Wellness has an online community. Membership is free. So to access copies of all of the presentations for Winter Wellness Week, and also to there's discussion threads on the online community so that you can chat and interact with the moderators and presenters of Wellness Week. We invite you to go ahead and join our community. So I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat.
And Christina, are the handouts, how are the handouts available, or does everybody already have access to them?
They're available on our online community site, which is www.baumanwellness.co. So if you sign up for free membership to our online community, then you can access all of the presentation materials for Winter Wellness Week, as well as chat with moderators and facilitators. Thank you for all of the work that you do with your nonprofit. It's just such important work, and we really appreciate you sharing that with us today.